you ever faced a moment where every second counted, where waiting could mean disaster and acting might just save lives? Today, you're about to hear the story of a lone farmer and an Apache woman whose words, "There's no time, do it now," shocked an entire village and changed the course of history. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and comment below if you're ready for a story of courage, urgency, and impossible choices. Let's get started. The wind had shifted suddenly, as if the land itself had held its breath. The farmer froze mid-step, his hand resting on the handle of his plow, eyes fixed on the horizon. There was a silence that felt wrong, heavy, expectant. Then the sound of hooves broke it, fast, uneven, desperate. In the next moment, a woman leapt from the horse, her chest heaving, her eyes sharp and unwavering. She grabbed his arm and said, "There's no time, do it now." Her words were not a request, they were an order, leaving no room for hesitation. The farmer flinched, taken aback. She was Apache, dressed plainly yet with undeniable dignity, her voice firm, her intent unmistakable. He wanted to ask questions, to understand, to know the reason behind this urgency, but the intensity in her gaze silenced every thought of delay. "If you wait, people will die," she said, and in that single line, the earth, sky, and time itself seemed to pivot toward a single point. He looked back at his fields, at his home, at the life that had always been safe, predictable, contained. This land had fed him, this silence had protected him, yet now the silence itself had become the threat. She pointed toward the red hills in the distance, where movement flickered like shadows, undetectable to anyone untrained, but with outcomes painfully clear. "They're heading for the river. Children are there," she said. The weight of her words settled into him, a burden no one could ignore. He knew that if he waited, help would not arrive in time. Soldiers did not move without orders, and orders always took time. He made a decision, one that many people in life face only once. He looked at the woman and said, "Come with me." It was not a promise, it was action. He ran toward the barn, harnessed the strongest horses, loaded sacks of grain, barrels of water, anything that could be carried fast. Every second counted, every breath measured. As they rode toward the river, the sun dipped lower, as if day itself was racing against them. The path was rough, the horses strong. The woman guided them with quiet authority, eyes scanning, always aware of every detail, every turn. Halfway through, smoke appeared on the horizon, not gentle smoke of cooking fires, but heavy, dark, threatening. The farmer's grip on the reins tightened. "Are we too late?" he asked. She said nothing, urging the horses forward, the silence itself carrying the weight of urgency. At the riverbank, chaos unfolded. Villagers scrambled, children cried, elders called for guidance, people grabbed what little they could carry. Across the trees, armed men advanced, not soldiers, not Apache, just men driven by greed and desperation. The farmer drove the wagon into the center of the village and shouted, "Take the grain, take the water, move south along the river, there's cover there." Some hesitated, unsure, but the woman's voice cut through panic, translating, directing, commanding. Then the farmer did the unexpected. He turned the wagon straight toward the approaching threat. The woman yelled after him, but he did not stop. He fired his rifle into the air, shouted, made himself impossible to ignore. The attackers faltered, their plan disrupted by a single man and his bold defiance. From behind the ridge, a bugle sounded. The soldiers had arrived. He had sent a young boy ahead with a simple message, hoping someone would listen. They did. The soldiers moved quickly, disciplined, precise. The attackers scattered into the trees, their moment lost. The river village remained intact. Fear subsided, dust settled, and life breathed again. The farmer climbed down, hands shaking now that the danger had passed. The Apache woman stood before him, eyes shining with relief and recognition. "You did not wait," she said. "No," he replied. "I finally learned some moments cannot be planned for." That day, the villagers saw a farmer transformed, but the real change had occurred in the land itself, a place that now listened, that now acted, that no longer allowed delay to decide who lived or died. The Apache woman returned briefly before departing. Standing by his fence, she nodded toward him, sunlight softening the plains around them. "You changed things," she said. "So did you," he replied. She rode back toward the hills, becoming once again part of the vast landscape. The farm stayed, the river flowed, and the story spread, not as one of violence or heroism alone, but as a lesson. When someone tells you there's no time, act. Waiting can be far costlier than risk. Some moments demand trust, courage, and action. And sometimes, doing what's right shocks the world into becoming something better. The morning after the river village was saved, the air felt different. charged with a quiet energy that no one could name. News traveled faster than Thomas could imagine. Word spread not through official channels, not through formal announcements, but by whispers, by the villagers who had witnessed the impossible. They spoke of a solitary farmer who had ridden straight into danger, who had commanded with authority when everyone else froze. By the time Thomas stepped out of his house, neighbors, traders, and even soldiers were already gathered at the edges of his land, curious, wary, and in awe. Thomas did not seek attention. He had spent his life quietly tending his fields, quietly helping those who passed through, quietly keeping to himself. But today, people looked at him differently. They saw a man who had chosen action over hesitation, trust over fear, and bravery over calculation. The Apache woman, who had been the catalyst of it all, had long gone, returning to the hills she had once fled from. Yet her presence lingered, invisible but palpable, in every grateful smile, every relieved sigh of the villagers. It was in the midst of this gathering that Thomas made another decision, one that would define his farm for the rest of his life. He opened his land, not just to neighbors, not just to travelers, but as a safe haven for those in need. Grain, water, shelter, all would be available for anyone whose life depended on speed, trust, and survival. He declared his farm neutral ground, a place where urgency would be respected, where action could be taken without waiting for permission. The villagers were stunned. Soldiers raised their eyebrows, but nodded in understanding, realizing that Thomas had just created a rare space of cooperation in a world otherwise divided by suspicion and fear. Days passed, and the village slowly returned to its routine, yet the story of Thomas Hale became legend. Children whispered about the brave farmer who faced danger head-on. Parents reminded each other of the lesson in courage and foresight. Traders on the roads spoke of the farmer who had acted when everyone else hesitated. And every time someone mentioned the words, "There's no time," they remembered the day Thomas had chosen to act, not to wait. But Thomas knew the true lesson wasn't in the praise or recognition. It was in understanding that every moment of hesitation could carry consequences far heavier than a calculated risk. He went back to his routines, feeding animals, repairing fences, tending crops, but with a different perspective. Every decision became sharper, more deliberate, guided not by fear of loss, but by awareness of opportunity. And in that awareness, Thomas found peace. The land had tested him, the people had trusted him, and he had acted when it mattered most. Months later, the river village faced another threat, not from men, but from nature itself. Heavy rains threatened to flood the banks, and the same villagers who had once been saved by Thomas now ran to his farm, seeking advice and assistance. Without hesitation, Thomas organized efforts to build temporary levees, redirect water, and move livestock to higher ground. The Apache woman had taught him the importance of swift action, and now he applied that lesson not in a single moment of crisis, but as a consistent principle. The villagers survived the flood, thanks in no small part to the systems Thomas had set up, inspired by that first day of decisive action. Over time, Thomas became more than just a farmer. He became a symbol of what courage, trust, and timely action could achieve. People traveled from distant settlements to learn from him, to see how one man could create safety and stability simply by acting when it was needed most. And yet, Thomas remained humble, insisting that he had merely done what anyone could have done if they chose to overcome fear and indecision. He often spoke of the Apache woman who had appeared that day, her urgency shaking him from his routine, teaching him that the difference between life and death could be a single decision made at the right time. Years passed. Children grew up hearing the story of Thomas Hale and the Apache woman, a story not just of bravery, but of timing, responsibility, and the power of immediate action. The river village thrived, its people forever grateful to the farmer who had chosen to act. Thomas continued his work quietly, yet his farm became a beacon of hope. Those who visited left with a lesson etched into their minds. Sometimes waiting, thinking, and planning are luxuries the world does not afford. Sometimes you must act. The true shock of that day, Thomas realized, was not the danger he faced, nor the praise he received. It was the simple truth that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary results when they chose to trust their instincts and act decisively. The Apache woman had vanished, her role complete, leaving Thomas and the villagers to live the consequences of their choices. And the lesson she imparted, a lesson simple yet profound, remained embedded in the land, the people, and Thomas himself. There is never a perfect moment. There is only now. Even decades later, travelers passing by the Red Hills would tell stories of a farmer who had faced impossible odds, who had acted when hesitation could have cost countless lives. Some doubted the tale, others marveled at it, but all agreed on one point. Action, taken at the right moment, could change everything. Thomas never sought recognition, yet in his quiet way, he transformed not just a village, but the hearts and minds of all who came into contact with his deeds. On quiet evenings, Thomas would sit by his fields, watching the sun dip behind the hills, and he would remember that first moment, the urgency in the Apache woman's eyes, the words that cut through fear, the decision that shook him to his core. He understood then, more clearly than ever, that life rewards those who act, not those who wait. And as the wind swept across the plains, rustling wheat and bending the tall grass, he would smile, knowing that the shock of that first decisive act had rippled outward, shaping lives far beyond his imagination. The Apache woman never returned, but her lesson endured. And Thomas Hale, the quiet farmer who had once measured every step carefully, had learned to move boldly, to act immediately, and to trust that courage and timing together could indeed save lives, shape communities, and leave a legacy that would endure long after the dust settled. The world, he realized, belongs to those who act, not tomorrow, not when convenient, but now. And that is the story of Thomas Hale, the farmer who chose action over hesitation, and of the Apache woman whose urgency taught an entire village, and perhaps the world, that there is no time to waste, and sometimes a single decision can shock everyone and change everything.